Hello and welcome to Straight Onto Disney, a Disney deep dive and analysis podcast, where each week I, your host Jonathan, takes a deep dive into the history of each Disney film and the legacies that they left behind. I'd like to remind you that you can follow me on Instagram at Straight Until Disney Pod, and you can email me at straightuntildisneypod at gmail.com. I hope you all had a lovely new year and a wonderful Christmas. I hope that this year is your year. I do hope that everyone did have a wonderful and happy new year, because I certainly did. I had a lovely new year. And I hope, especially if you're listening in the UK, you're wrapped up and warm as I am during the snow. That was unexpected, but it's starting to melt where I am now. So we'll see if that is the end of the snowfall up north, but I very much doubt it. Very much expecting to wake up to more snow tomorrow. So I hope everybody is staying warm and safe indoors or wherever you are. So this week's episode is all about Saludos Amigos, which, to be truthful, I'm not a huge fan of. It's not one I'm gonna jump to, and I'm not going to go, oh, I'll put that film on, but still, nevertheless, I did quite enjoy it. It's an alright film. It's obviously it's not something that you're always going to remember, but it is a nice film, and understandably why it was crafted. But yeah, it's not one that I'm genuinely going to go, oh, I'll rewatch that time and time again. But in almost truthfully, it's a beautiful crafted film, and I think it'd be nice for once in a while if you went and looked at it, because it's quite nice. I know I'm saying most of the same things, but there's not really too much to talk about it in terms of film parts. So this episode might be a little shorter, and I might put this week's bonus episode out a little earlier, just because there's not too much to chat about when it comes to Salidas Amigas. And there's not really too much. And I think as I go through the next few weeks of Free Campbello's, Ichabod and Mr. Toad, etc., etc., maybe that one there might be a lot more to, but I did have to really dig deep to find the production history for Salidas Amigas. So, Salidas Amigas was directed by Norman Ferguson, Wilfred Jackson, Jack Kinney, Hamilton Lusk, and Bill Roberts, produced by Walt Disney, written by Homer Brightman, William Cottrell, Dick Humer, Joe Grant, Harry Reeves, Ted Sears, Webb Smith, Roy Williams, and Ralph Wright. The film stars Lee Blair, Mary Blair, Pinto Colvig, Walt Disney, Norman Ferguson, Frank Graham, Clarence Nash, Jose Oliveira, Frank Thomas, Stuart Buchanan, and Jimmy McDonald. Music is by Oliver Wallace, Paul Smith, and Edward H. Plum. Studios was Walt Disney Productions. Distributor was RKO Radio Pictures. The film was released on August 24th, 1942 in Rio de Janeiro, released February 6th, 1943 in Boston, and released February 19th, 1943 in the United States. It has a running time of 42 minutes. Its languages were released in English and Portuguese, and it approximately had a budget of 300 million, which was partly subsidized by a 550,000 government grant. Salidas Amigas grossed over 1.2 million worldwide, introducing the character Jose Carioca and influencing subsequent Disney works such as The Three Campbellos, which is the next Disney film release. So, Salidas Amigas, which is Spanish for greetings friends, It's the sixth animated feature in the Disney animation canon, released in 1942, and it is the first of the six Disney packaged films made during the 1940s, when many members of the Walt Disney Company had to go were drafted in for World War Two, which is very much understandable, and I think we'll see a lot of that discussions in the next few episodes. Therefore, the company could not afford to make feature length films during the time, and thus instead produced films composed of multiple shorter segments. Set in Latin America, it is made up of four different segments. Donald Duck stars in two of them, and Goofy stars in one. And it also features the first appearance of Jose Carioca, and at a running time of 42 minutes, this makes it the shortest Disney animated feature, as well as the first to be based on an original property. The film itself was given federal loan guarantees because the Disney studio had overexpanded just before European markets were closed to them by the war, and because Disney was struggling with labour unrest at the time, including a strike that was underway at the time the Goodwill journey began. The film was popular enough that Walt Disney decided to make The Freak Umbrellas 2 years later. It was made partially because several Latin American governments had close ties with Nazi Germany, and the US government wanted to counteract those ties. Mickey Mouse and other Disney characters were popular in Latin America, and Walt Disney acted as ambassador. So we've already seen how the war was very much impacting the Disney company. So its production history, did have to dig deep for this. So there's a lot of complicated and fascinating things within this. So I'm going to try and break it down as much as I can. So the production of Saludos Amigos was deeply rooted in the geopolitical imperatives of World War II, and particularly the United States' efforts to cultivate alliances in Latin America against Axis expansion. President Franklin D. Roosevelt's good neighbor policy, articulated in the 1930s, marking a departure from prior US interventionism far toward hemispheric cooperation through economic and cultural initiatives, aiming to foster goodwill and economic inter- interdependence without overt military pressure. This approach gained urgency as Nazi Germany saw influence in South America via propaganda, trade, and immigrant communities, prompting the US concerns over potential sabotage or neutrality that could undermine Allied supply lines. To implement these policies, Roosevelt established the Office of Coordinator of Inter-American Affairs, the CIA, in 1940, appointing Nelson Rockefeller to lead efforts in countering Axis propaganda through media and cultural exchanges. The CIA provided financial support to Walt Disney Studios for Saludos Amigos, funding research and production as part of a broader contract to produce films, promoting inter-American solidarity. This initiative exemplified soft power diplomacy, leveraging popular entertainment to portray Latin American cultures sympathetically alongside US characters, thereby diminishing Nazi sympathizers' appeal in regions like Brazil and Argentina, where German language media had gained traction. The film's release in 1943 correlated with measurable diplomatic gains, including increased US favorably in Latin American public opinion and contributions to hemispheric unity, facilitated resource exports and military basing rights for the Allies. Theatres across the region reported high attendance, signalling effective cultural penetration that prioritized grammat- pragmatic pragmatic alliance building over ideological imposition. This this success underscored the policy's casual emphasis, verifiable outcomes such as reduced access, economic footholds, rather than unsustainable narratives of universal harmony. So there's a lot there. I'm not gonna lie, it, it's very complicated, and I think you should, if you want to learn more, go and have a deep dive through the grop Wikipedia. I found this all information on, because there's a lot here, and there's a lot that's very complicated, contributed, which is why I was like, I'll deep dive into it, but I'm not gonna go full in because I don't 100% understand this, and it's quite detailed and very very extensive in what they're discussing. And I think if you want to learn more, I'd go in and do your own research because it's quite complex. So, Disney's South American research expedition. In August 1941, Disney's personally led a research expedition to South America, departing Burbank, California, with a team of 16 artists, animators, and composers, including his wife Lillian. The group arrived in Rio de Janeiro on August 17th and proceeded to visit key locations in Brazil, Argentina, Chile, and Peru, conducting field work until early October before returning via ship from Valparaiso on October 4th. The expedition focused on collecting primary visual and cultural references to inform future animators, with team members sketching urban scenes, rural landscapes, indigenous folklore, and everyday customs across the regions. Artists produced thousands of on-site drawings and watercolors, such as those by Mary Blair, depicting vibrant Brazilian carnivals and Armenian markets, while recording local music, dances, and dialects. These efforts included hiring regional performers and consultants to model authentic behaviors, laying groundwork for character archetypes like the Brazilian parrot Jose Carioca, derived from observed lively street vendors and musicians rather than generic stereotypes. The team also amazed live action film footage of locals in motion and physical artifacts like costumes and instruments for studio reference libraries. So, once again, as much as we've discussed it in the last few weeks about how they used live action, these people, they were finding real life people to base these characters upon. And I do quite find that so fascinating and wish that some of this could be unearthed, or maybe it hasn't, I've just never seen it, where you can see the efforts and the lengths that they went to get this right, to make sure that they weren't going to get draw criticism from it not feeling authentic. And I do quite like that, in terms of able to showcase different cultures and finding ways to make them really unique for film. So Disney's hands-on participation reflected pragmatic business strategy amid acute studio challenges, including the May 1941 animators strike that I mentioned during Dumbo's episode, that disrupted operations, and the box office disappointment of Fantasia and Pinocchio, compounded by European markets closure due to escalating war. With payroll strained and loans mounting, Disney targeted untapped Latin American distribution channels to generate revenue through culturally resonant shorts, prioritizing economic survival over ideological motives. This approach yielded cost efficient production methods, such as integrating live action references into animated sequences, which conserved resources during subsequent wartime materials shortages and labour constraints. Development challenges and innovations. The Walt Disney Studios faced acute financial difficulty in the early 1940s, exacerbated by the 1941 animators strike that began on May 29th and lasted 5 weeks, which disrupted operations and increasing labour costs. The crisis was compounded by the commercial underperformance of Pinocchio and Fantasia, which failed to recoup their high production expenses and reduce theatre revenues from World War II, leaving the studio reliant on the lower budget Dumbo to stabilise finances. In response, Disney pivoted to an anthology package film format for Salidas Amigas, assembling short segments rather than investing in a single narrative feature, which minimalized animation requirements and production timelines while leveraging existing character assets of Donald Duck and Goofy. So, once again, what we're seeing here is them going, we don't have the money, so how can we use what we have to craft interesting and unique stories and thus bringing Donald and Goofy to the forefront? To further constrain costs, the film adopted a runtime of just 42 minutes, the shortest in Disney's animated canon at the time, as an experimental approach to short form entertainment that could qualify as a feature without exhaustive animation demands. Innovations included integrating live action sequences of Disney artists sketching in South America as transitional rappers to bridge animated vignettes, reducing the need for full animated exposition and incorporating real world footage to evoke authenticity on a limited budget. These techniques emphasized efficient storytelling with stylized, less fluid animation in segments like El Goku, Goofy, prioritizing character exaggeration and cultural caricature over integrate motion, allowing completion in 1942 despite wartime resource constraints on material and personnel. So really what we're seeing here is them, as I've just said, them going, what can we do? We don't have everything. How can we pivot so that there's still a product that we can craft and create? And I do find that that very much is really interesting to think about in terms of that the as especially as we go through the next few films. World War Two is a very big contextual factor in why a lot of the films weren't as successful at the box office, and we saw with Dumbo, it was much more successful in 1949, years after which is 4 years after the war. So it's very interesting to think about how they were still trying to craft unique stories, but doing it in a much shorter and intricate way. The film's reception. The film was nominated for 3 Oscars: Best Musical Score, Best Original Song for its opening theme, and Best Sound Recording. The film included live-action sequences featuring footage of modern Latin American cities with skyscrapers and fashionably dressed citizens. The surprise contemporary Look, sorry about that. This surprised contemporary US viewers who associated such images with US and European cities and contributed to changing impressions of Latin America. Film historian Alfred Charles Richard Jr. has commented that Salidas Amigos did much to cement a community of interest between peoples of the Americas in a few months than the State Department had in 50 years, which I find quite interesting and quite ironic. The film also inspired Chilean cartoonist Rene Rios Richiti to create Condorito, one of Latin America's most ubiquitous cartoon characters. Rios perceived that the character Pedro, a small, incapable airplane, was a sight to Chileans and created a comic that could supposedly rival Disney's comic characters. Other critics, however, were less kind to the film. James Agee of The Nation, for one, scorned it as depressing and self-interested, and that Disney's famous cuteness however richly it may mirror national infantilism, is hard on my stomach. Along the same lines, John T. McManus of the newspaper PM accused it of mingled pride and sadness over the growing up of a beloved something we all foolishly hoped could stay young forever. Review aggregator website Rotten Tomatoes reports that 80% of the critics gave the film a positive review based on 10 reviews, which is really interesting and think about when it comes to Rotten Tomatoes. You never know what you're really going to get with it. Censorship. This is an interesting one. So, the scene of Goofy smoking an El Gacho Goofy is edited out when released onto home video in 2000 Gold Classic Collection, the Gold Classic Collection, and 2008 as part of a double bill with the three Cambarellos. However, the gag where Donald breathes fire after drinking caca and lighting up Jose's cigar is left intact. This edit is also present in the on the iTunes release, which extends the Walt Disney Presents card on to plaster the Buena Vista logo. The first home video release to present this film uncensored is the archive collection Laserdisc. Walt and El Grupo also includes the uncut Salidas Amigos. It's also present uncut on the 2 movie pack Blu-ray with the three Cambarellos, released in 2018, released as a Disney Movie Club exclusive. The film was later added to Disney Plus in 2019, uncensored and uncut, but with a disclaimer. So, we're getting to the plot of this. There's not too much plot, so that's why I do think this week's going to be a little smaller, not as long as some of the other films have been. So, a group of Disney animators make a goodwill trip to South America. This is documented in live action. An animated segment details which places they visit. Lake Titicaca. Donald Duck visits the famous Lake Titicaca, located at the border of Peru and Bolivia. He looks around, learns of the lake's traditions, and makes a failed attempt at sailing a boat before setting off through the mountains atop a llama. He panics when the llama is busy walking across a wooded suspension bridge, eventually resulting in his fall. He lands into a pottery shop, shattering some pots and taking others with him. Pedro, a small anthropomorphically child aeroplane, Pedro lives in Chile with his mother and father, large aeroplanes, who deliver mail. When they both are incapacitated due to technical defects, Pedro is forced to embark on his first journey in their place, picking up post from Mendoza. His flight is perilous and dangerous, and he's nearly killed in a storm near Aconcagua on his way back, but manages to make it back victoriously in the end. El Gaco Goofy. Goofy, reimagined as a Texas cowboy, is put to work as a Gaco in Argentina. He works together with a trickster horse as the narrator explains the life of a Gaco. Life as a Gaco for Goofy is strange, harsh, and tiresome, not because of the living conditions, but mainly due to the antics of his horse. He's flown back to Texas in the end to his gratitude. Aqualia del Brazil. We see a paintbrush painting a beautiful, rendered Brazilian jungle, which Donald Duck emerges from, a flower, at some point. While standing around, Donald sees the paintbrush, creating another figure, Jose Carioca. Jose takes Donald out of the jungle and into Rio de Janeiro, where Donald accidentally drinks an incredibly spicy drink, thinking it was soda, before spending the night going out and dancing to the samba in Rio with Jose. And that's really it for Saludos Amigos in terms of plot. There's not too much to actually talk and discuss about, which it's a bit of a shame. because some of it is quite nice, but you can understand why they decided to go with package films. And there's some really beautiful animation in the way that some of it is shot, the way that they did some of the lighting, which I find really interesting. And some of the soundscapes are really unique to this film, and that adds to the character and charm of each of these little shorts. And yeah, there's not really too much else to say about Salidas Amigas because there's not very much in terms of parks. So when it comes to legacy, there's not too much of a legacy that this film's left behind, other than, well, the only real legacy it's left behind is that it opened the doors to seeing Latin America in a new light and allowing Americans to understand Latin America in a very unique and interesting light, which I find quite fascinating to think about. And I do find that that is very much what this film's legacy is, especially during world wars and during such unprecedented times. So I do think that that is its legacy. It doesn't really have a legacy in the parks. There's some parts where Salidas Amigas has a something in Tokyo Disney, but I'm not 100% sure because I couldn't find it properly what exactly it was. So if you know, let me know, because I do find that quite interesting and unique to think about. And yeah, so there's not too much to chat about when it comes to the legacy of Salidas Amigas in parks, in merch, which is a bit of a shame, but yeah. So this is your weekly reminder that you can find me on chatting on Disney Hot Topic this week. There's a lot of us on talking about park prices and ticket prices. We had a lovely long chat on Sunday night, so that'll be out on Friday as usual. You'll know because I will be posting about it on Instagram as usual, and looking forward to some of the other chats that they've got planned and watching them because some of them are really interesting, and I do find getting to really know and learn a lot more is really interesting. So yeah, Disney Hot Topic on Instagram and YouTube. Go and give them a follow and subscribe. This week's shout outs go to Luke and Dan, the Yorkshire husbands, who are a lovely pair of Disney vloggers who've just started doing Disney vlogs on YouTube. They're a lovely pair. So you can go follow them on Instagram at the Yorkshire Husbands, and it's at the Yorkshire Husband also on YouTube. I also just want to give a shout out to Olivia, who is Broke Drop Ready on Instagram and YouTube, who's a lovely, lovely girl and is incredibly lovely supporting the podcast and is incredibly good at editing Disney Hot Topics. So go and give her a follow because she's absolutely lovely. And yeah, I think I'm gonna wrap this one up and then maybe bonus episode because I want to do some chatting about box office stuff. So that might come out today as well, a little later on. But other than that, you can find me on Instagram at Straight Until Disney Pod. You can find my personal Instagram on Jathan_MC131 if you ever want to follow. You can email me at straightuntildisneypod@gmail.com, and thank you for listening and bye.